Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. In this episode of the Intentional Success Podcast, I debunk some of the conventional wisdom that undercuts your efforts to be more scalable. Today, I want to talk about hang-ups, right? We have a lot of hang-ups. I mean, just as human beings, but in general, but in our industry, in this live events technology industry, we have a lot of hang-ups. And one of our biggest hang-ups is about capacity. So I just want to start with capacity. So the question I ask when somebody says, oh, we're out of capacity, what is capacity? Well, the typical answer is going to be, well, our resources or time. We talk about lead times a lot. What does lead time matter, right? You're going to do the same amount of work. You're just going to do it sooner than you thought. It doesn't take you 2 weeks to prep a show. It takes you 2 days. So who cares if your lead time is 2 weeks or 2 months? But we get hung up on this, okay? So resources and time are the typical measurements of capacity in the live events business. But I'm going to argue that your capacity is really tied to your ability to plan and innovate. And when you run out of planning and you run out of innovation, you are out of capacity. And it doesn't matter how many resources you have or how much time you have, okay, you're going to hit a wall. And this is the battle, the classic battle between, old school thinking, best practices, and the assumptions that we've had and held on to for years versus planning ahead and innovating, thinking 5 steps ahead and being clever about how we solve things so maybe we can go 10 steps ahead. This all gets down to rental mentality versus service mentality. And we are from a rental industry. We were born out of rental. What we do has a rental component to it, but we have been doing a service, delivering a service for years and years and years. But that mix, of those two concepts constantly trips us up, and it has a major effect on our ability to comprehend what our capacity actually is. And because of that understanding of capacity, we have traditionally been adding resources to our businesses in order to increase capacity without becoming better at planning and becoming better at innovating. And the net result is our margins shrunk for year after year until they were almost nothing by the end of 2019. So rental mentality has held us back. And all due nods to rental, because rental got us where it is. It's still a great business model. When you're a service business, using rental methodologies becomes problematic. So in a recent promotional piece about my workshop on scalability, I ranted a bit, which I tend to do from time to time. And I brought up a lot of the misconceptions and bullet pointed them that I run into. And in the promo, of course, I just treat them as self-evident, but I want to unpack them for you and give you a little bit of the backstory on them, because I think that insight will help us better understand. It's not enough to know that, this is probably not a good idea anymore, or this is no longer a best practice. But I want you to understand why it is, so that you can uncover more things in your organization that you can unpack, that you can rethink and remodel to fit your service organization going forward. So let's go straight to the list, right? This is fun. It was fun coming up with the list. Let me tell you, writing promotional pieces is one of my great joys in business, more than blog posts, because I get to creatively drill down into that topic. And scalability is a huge topic, and it's been a tremendous amount of fun for me to explore it and apply it and help my clients understand what it means to their organization to move into a more scalable model, how that frees them up, how that changes their whole concept of capacity and profitability. All of a sudden, what can you do with your business has a whole new meaning, and it's exciting to get up every morning knowing that you have options that you didn't think you had before. But enough of that. What's some of the stuff that's holding people back, right? If I'm dealing with a new client or even an old client who's still stuck in their ways about something or another, or I'm talking to a prospect, here are some of the things that I find come up fairly often, if not 100% of the time. First of all, several things about staff technicians. Why do we have staff technicians? It's important to have staff technicians. They represent our brand. They're in front of our customers, yada, 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 yada. They're less expensive. They're less expensive. A staff technician is less expensive per hour than a freelancer, so they cost less per job. Whoa. Let me tell you a story about one of my clients who had actually the exact opposite thing. I think it's the perfect way to expose this myth. Because there's no math based in this. This is just a feeling that people have. One of my clients, we were working on job costing in their organization, trying to get their profitability under control. And one of the things that we noticed, because the salespeople were responsible for generating profitability in the proposal process, they had to do a budget and they had to account for their costs. All good stuff. What the salespeople and good salespeople, if there's a hole in the system, they will find a way through it. God bless them. They find out where things are broken and they leverage it. And what these salespeople had figured out was that the staff technicians and the cost basis for staff technicians was higher than some of their preferred freelancers. Oops. So we had salespeople now who were specifying specific freelancers at their lower cost basis, and of course passing that savings on to their customers because, well, we want customers to love us, right? So we uncovered this and we started looking into what are the real costs of these technicians. And we found out that if we looked at their utilization rates, in other words, how many days a year these staff technicians were actually paid for by a job versus, just doing work around the shop or just getting paid for doing nothing, which happened way too often. If we applied all of their costs to the jobs, they were extremely expensive. If we applied what they were worth to the job, in other words, the replacement cost was lower than their actual cost. So this is upside down, right? We made some steps to fix this. We better understood this. We, got the salespeople to sell on replacement cost, which was, in this case, the cost of a staff person versus the cost of a freelancer. And we plugged the hole. Straightforward stuff. But more often than not, I'm finding organizations where the staff technicians, because they're making $35 an hour plus versus a freelancer who's charging $50 an hour, therefore, staff technicians are always cheaper. Except that staff technicians are always on overtime. So there's a lot of misconceptions about how people are paid and what they are paid, and how that applies to a particular job. Because the thing about staff technicians is we don't pay for them one job at a time. We pay for them all of the time, which leads to the next misconception that I run into, that staff technicians can do other tasks when they're not on shows, which helps keep our costs down. And that one hurts. I mean, that really hurts. What are they actually doing? Well, they're prepping shows. They're doing pre-production. They're tidying up their toolbox. They're going to meetings. They're filling out expense reports. None of these things add value. None of these things generate income for the business. None of these things are why they were hired in the first place. It's just busy work. So we're filling in the calendar with some busy work to justify having the rest of the time. But when we do use them, we're applying the lower cost and we're not capturing the unproductive time in that cost. So they effectively become additional overhead. Staff technicians are not always direct costs. They are very often overhead because there is no such thing as 100% utilization. And if you do have 100% utilization, then why can't they just be outsourced? Because that's effectively what you're doing, right? You're only using them when you have direct work to provide them, and they're 100% managed. That's basically a freelancer, okay? So when I visit a new customer or I'm talking to a prospect, I always ask them to tell me about the busiest day of the year. What's the busiest day of the year test? It's on the busiest day of the year, how many people are in your office? Well, the typical answer is it's the person I'm talking to and the bookkeeper. And if somebody needs to run a piece of equipment to a show site at an airport, the bookkeeper goes first, right? That's the busiest day of the year because every other single person in the organization is on a show site, which is the first indication that we have a very unscalable organization. So the idea that we have all of these people because several times a year everybody is working, plus the office staff is out working, we're using that idea to justify the fact that we need more technicians. And if we had more technicians, we could take one more show. So this one hurts a lot, right? You can't perform the basic needs functions when you are busy if everybody's on show site, which means your customer service is poor, which means you're not prepping for next month's jobs. You're not selling the next job. You're not winning a new client. You're not doing any of the maintenance and other things that need to go on, regardless of how busy you are. Basically, you're subsidizing current profitability. I'm making air quotes with my fingers. Okay, in exchange for really bad profit on the next slow period that you have, right? So it's a reverse subsidy. It doesn't work. If we have 100% utilization, there's a better way of managing that team. And then another thing that I hear about staff technicians is that they care more about the job than freelancers, which I usually put my hands on the table and lean in and say, what are you talking about? Have you ever worked with a professional freelancer? And if you have not, then you probably have a basis for believing that there are people out there who don't care about the job. But the fact is, and I was a longtime freelancer, so I'm pretty defensive about this, freelancers care about the job. We know as freelancers that we are only as good as our last gig. Right? A staff guy can screw up. He'll still be a staff guy tomorrow. Freelancer screws up. They're not working for that company anymore. We absolutely do care about that job. And if you have people who don't care about the job, why did you hire them? Right? So how is it that you are not being exposed to professional freelancers that would allow you to perpetuate this horrible, horrible concept that staff technicians don't care? Okay? The problem is we can ask our staff to do more things, which is just another way of subsidizing costs. We can ask those freelancers to do that. Here's the deal. They're going to charge you for it, but you know what? You're paying for the staff guy anyway, right? So we should sell what the job takes to do, not give away work by our staff members on the premise that, well, we're already paying them, therefore it's free. And then we will always have somebody on the job who absolutely cares. Because does a staff person care about the job that they're having to do that's below their skill level, but they happen to be available? They made the mistake of being a full-time employee, so now they're running house lights on a press conference instead of running a multi-camera switching system, in an arena. Think about that. All right, a couple of other myths. Let's move down into the warehouse. This is another one that kind of gets me wound up, right? The idea that every time we hire somebody for the warehouse, what we're hiring is a future technician, and we start them in the warehouse, and everybody's on the path to become one of these technicians who, by the way, are underutilized. And I don't understand why people think this works. One, it has worked on occasion. You have occasionally gotten a good technician that started in the warehouse. Ask your warehouse manager what it was like to work with that person on their career path. Because somebody who's on the path for becoming a technician becomes a really crummy warehouse worker really quick. And then the warehouse manager wants them out of that warehouse so fast, they're saying, oh, this guy really needs to do shows, and they're pushing them off on the show staff, probably long before they're ready. Why not hire a warehouse worker who wants to be a warehouse worker? Why not hire somebody who doesn't want to go on the road? Why not hire somebody who doesn't think staying up all night in a ballroom setting up equipment is sexy? Hire somebody who wants to come in every day and prep shows and keep the floors clean and put the gear back in place and do all the stuff that makes the business run well. Okay, that's what I'm looking for in a warehouse worker. Okay, so the result is that if you hire for technical staff, the warehouse ops is always going to be compromised. As soon as somebody becomes competent, okay, we steal them. We take them away. We put them on shows. The warehouse manager has a smaller team to work with. He's got to go hire somebody else who is now inexperienced, and he's constantly having to train new people. And once they get good, they get stolen to go drive a truck or go set up scaffolding or become a projectionist, right? You can't perform the basic needs of the warehouse with an untrained staff all the time. Okay. This makes the company reactive. This makes the warehouse team, which is pivotal in your operational process. And a good warehouse team means that your show team never has to come in the warehouse, which honestly is the goal. If you have show technicians in the warehouse to prep shows, you've got a problem, right? And it's a big problem. It's an expensive problem, but it starts with thinking that every warehouse technician is a future show technician. Warehouse operations is a career path. And I can honestly tell you, there are people who I hired 20 years ago who are still in that job. They are thriving individuals. They are raising families. They are building their career, and they are super, super valuable to that organization. Okay. But they know that tomorrow they still have a job running a well-trained, well-honed warehouse operation. All right. So one of the things behind that concept about having to, all technicians came from the warehouse, or all warehouse workers become technicians, is the idea that a warehouse worker can never prep a show. And you have to let show technicians prep a show because they will pack their own parachute, which is, it's hard to argue with packing your own parachute until you look at the math and what do show technicians do? They take gear that wasn't allocated to the job. They take more stuff than they need. They make gear flow problematic. They don't work at a worker's pace. They work at their own pace, which means, you're not going to get things done in a timely manner. And the fact is, if they're a show technician, when their show is being prepped, they should be on another show. So that means I have to take them off of shows or schedule them around shows. So I have show technicians to prep a show, or they're prepping a show for someone else, which is exactly what a warehouse worker would do if they were fully trained and allowed to do that job. So the problem is not that the warehouse workers don't know how to do the job. The problem is the company never learned how to do process and standardization that would allow us to train people to do that work. The fact is, 90% of what you do is not custom at all. Okay. The stuff that is custom can be specified. We can provide oversight to make sure that it was done correctly. But everything else that's going in the show prep is standard. It goes out the same way it went out last time. When it comes back from the show, we QC it. We put it back exactly the way it was before. We put it back on the shelf so that it can go out again. Warehouse workers, trained warehouse workers will do this. Your operational team can keep this process going if we will take the time to figure out what we can standardize and do it. Okay. Then after that, it is simply process. And maintaining that process will increase your scalability and allow things to run more smoothly. And on the busiest day of the year, if your warehouse team is not prepping a show for next week because there's no gear in, they are doing deep QC on what remains. They're servicing things that need to be serviced. They're rearranging the shelves to be more efficient. They're getting the warehouse spotless. There's a lot of things they could be doing instead of, let's wait until summer and we're going to do all of that during July when we're slow. No, that stuff needs to be done all the time. This is when they're doing it, on the rare occasions when they don't have jobs to prep. So, big deal. Let's change our mindset about what do we need for permanent staff and how long can they be permanent. They can be permanent forever if you put the right people, processes, and systems in place. Another misconception that is very common, because we're a rental business, right? If we want to reduce our subrentals, okay, subrentals are an outside expense, we can reduce them by buying that equipment. If I owned that equipment, I wouldn't have to subrent. I would make more money on this job. It would keep job costs down. Well, job cost mentality says that we should own all of our gear, then all the jobs look profitable. But how much is enough? This is basically the same argument about having enough staff technicians to fill all of our jobs when we're busy. What do we do when we're slow? You can own all the gear in the world, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to do. It is a business decision, okay? But there's a point in time where you can have too much. I've always said this, subrentals aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with a subrental. Subrental is something that when we need that, it's because we were planning something and recognized that we were going to have this shortfall, and here we filled a shortfall. It's just like hiring a freelancer. I'm short staffed technicians. I hire a freelancer. It's just good business. It doesn't always make sense to add inventory, permanent cost, permanent expense, permanent overhead for a short-term need. So rethinking this, and all of these things, the having staff technicians, hiring warehouse workers to become staff technicians, buying more equipment. I hate to say this, but I'm going to, because that's the mood I'm in today. This is just lazy. I mean, we do these things because we don't feel like it's a good return on our time and energy to plan better, develop a deeper bench of freelancers, have more resources, have a better control of pricing. If we own all of the resources, we feel like we can go out and sell at any price, win any job that we want to, without completely giving up our margin, because we're using job cost to justify our business decisions. And job cost is not necessarily a good business decision. It's a good job decision. And one job does not represent your entire business. You have to look at all of the jobs together. So a lot of this thinking we have is trying to improve a single job, but we need to pull back and look at how do we improve an entire organization. Okay? Same thing with leasing equipment. Using other people to grow your business. This is a big contributor to the death spiral. Leasing equipment is great. It means I don't have to use my own capital. I can just make a monthly payment. I get the gear sooner. I can start making money for me sooner. But it does force you into a situation where you have bought something that you can't afford, because if you could afford it, you would have had the cash and you would have bought it. No, you took on debt. You took on a monthly lease payment, and now you have to keep that equipment moving or do something to generate income because you just increased your overhead. You increase the amount of cash that you need every month. So technically it may not be overhead if you're treating it as a capital lease. But you still have to service that debt, which means you have to throw off enough cash to make all of your debt payments, your loan payments, etc. So it's a false economy. It is kicking the can down the road, and it's a lot of what got us into such hot water in 2020 when the pandemic kicked in, and all of a sudden the bottom fell out on the work. Is that we had a huge amount of debt and cash demands built into our business model that was completely reliant on there being one more job. So leasing equipment is a contributor to the death spiral. It causes us to sell unwisely in order to generate cash flow. And it's something we need to think about. Sending detailed price lists to your customers. There's another one on my bullet list, right? So they know that nothing is free. Detailed price lists have also helped contribute to the death spiral, have driven our prices down. We've shown the customer our math, and our math was bad, and they were never going to tell us, right? They were just going to go, whoa, I found ways to get these guys to drop their prices anymore. I can't believe they're doing this. Let's see if we can get them to do it further. And we did. We kept accommodating them, and our margins have shrunk because of it. And we keep showing them price lists. Well, you can argue, well, they ask for the price list. Of course they do. We taught them to look at them. We taught them which levers to pull. All right. So we've got to get away from that. We know how to get away from that. It is hard work. It takes commitment. You're going to suffer some rejection. Get over it. It's a bad practice. We need to figure out what's holding us back from making a move away from that. What goes in hand with that is salespeople needing all these pricing tools to win the job, that all jobs are won on price. We give them discounts and multi-day rates. We can reduce line items. We can comp things. Okay. Here's my argument. If the only issue we have in winning business is price, then what in the world do we need salespeople for? I mean, they're performing zero sales function whatsoever. They're not even taking the order properly, right? Because they're modifying the order to meet the customer tastes, and giving things away, which is not how your system was designed to do. So let's face the reality that we've done this to ourselves and we need to fix a lot of it. This also leads, here's the thing that supports these ideas, is that the customer is asking for a lower price is because they know they can get it from someone else already. So if we believe that the customer asking for a lower price is an indication that they know something we don't know, therefore we have to accommodate them. Okay, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So we've created this Ouroboros of spiral out of control that the customer is controlling the fate of our business when it's always been in our hands. Which leads to the final point on my list. And I'm pausing here because it's like, I got to say this out loud and I got to say it with a straight face. Markup is greedy. I've heard so many people tell me that marking things up is greedy. We should not charge the customer for getting something for them. We can't mark up airfare. We can't mark up subrentals. We can't charge that much for labor. Oh my goodness. This concept is the root of most of our pricing and delivery issues. Okay? What got us into the near zero net profit of 2019 and a record-breaking revenue year was the idea that making money was bad. And we gave the power of that decision to people who should have had no business to have that power. Okay? So we have traditionally put pricing and costs and therefore margins in the hands of people who, with their best intentions, simply don't understand the value of money. Let me give you an example. You hire a service technician to come out to your house. Maybe you need some plumbing done, you're getting some irrigation put in, I don't care what it is. What are you paying per hour? $150, $180, $200 an hour? Ask the technician what they make. They're making $35, $40, maybe $45 an hour. Okay? Why is the service rate 4 times the cost of the technician? Because salespeople aren't in charge of pricing. That's why. Because that is what it costs. The value of a technician is not in their time. If it was in their time, we would take $45, we'd put a modest markup on it, and hope that you would buy from us. The value is in finding, training, and retaining that person, providing them the tools, having management in place to support them. That's what you are paying for. Okay? This is what we don't agree. This is not markup. This is the cost of business and getting a fair margin for it. So the next time your team freaks out about marking something up 20%, remember that your target gross profit is 40%. And if you only mark it up 20%, you just lowered the blended gross profit of your job and you're shooting yourself in the foot. Markup is not greedy. Markup is getting paid for what you are providing, which requires a lot of expertise and resources, planning, knowledge, and innovation to do. And that's where our value is. That's how we need to build our companies. So, in conclusion, rant over. What does a well-run company look like? A well-run live event production company can always support one more job. And if it's the last job they can do, once they've got it supported, they will find they can support one more job. Look at your organization. Add a last-minute order and follow the process through the system. Okay? What do? You check availability. People in the general sense of, do we have the gear that can do this? Great. We check availability. We say, oh, well, we should be able to support this. Okay? You have dedicated resources. You have technical project review to make sure that we sold something that's going to work. We have a labor and travel desk. We have sub-rental and logistics that procure everything else that we need. We have somebody who scrubs the order. We have accounting. We quote the job with a deadline and we execute upon confirmation. That's all it takes to do a last-minute order, and these things are already in place. And if they are there for the purpose of supporting sales, of supporting the jobs that you sell, you can always sell one more job, right? The enemy of scalability is complacency, so don't settle for the status quo. That's my rant. Thanks for listening. If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.